Welcome to the channel, my alien friends. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Enjoy listening. Commander Lyle Vexar stood rigid at the helm of the Perseverance, his eyes locked onto the approaching enemy ship. The silence of the cold, star-filled void outside the viewport was deceiving. Behind the stillness lay the throbbing tension of war. A war he had fought for longer than he cared to admit. His hands tightened on the edge of the console, knuckles turning white. "Incoming Valoran vessel within weapons range," announced Lieutenant Corvin from the tactical station, his voice laced with anticipation. "Shields up, prepare for evasive maneuvers," Vexar ordered, his voice steady. The familiar knot of dread curled in his stomach, but he buried it deep, beneath layers of hardened duty. There was no room for doubt in command. The Valoran ship, sleek and deadly, cut through the dark, its metallic surface gleaming like a predator poised to strike. The Federation had encountered them countless times before, but the sight of their formidable craft still sent a shiver down his spine. The Valorans were ruthless, their strategies efficient, their resolve unwavering. And today, Vexar would face one of their deadliest weapons yet. "Sir, they're charging weapons," Corvin said, his tone shifting to alarm. "Open a channel," Vexar ordered. A brief moment of static crackled over the comms before he spoke. "This is Commander Lyle Vexar of the Federation starship Perseverance. I offer you one chance to stand down and surrender. There is no need for more bloodshed." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the hum of the ship's systems. The Valorans wouldn't answer. They never did. Vexar knew the protocol well enough to anticipate what came next. "No response, Commander," Corvin confirmed. "Very well," Vexar muttered under his breath, his eyes narrowing. "Initiate Phase 2. Ready the boarding parties." The bridge erupted into a controlled flurry of activity as crew members executed the order with practiced precision. Vexar allowed himself a momentary glance at the enemy ship looming closer on the viewscreen, its predatory lines suggesting a trap. But he'd been through worse. This was not his first skirmish with the Vylorans. "Docking team in position, sir?" said Corvin. Vexar nodded grimly. "Initiate docking procedure. I'll lead the assault team myself." The deck shuddered beneath his feet as the Perseverance latched onto the Vylaran craft. Vexar tightened his grip on the hilt of his plasma blade, holstered at his hip. He always led from the front, no matter the danger. His crew needed to see their commander in the thick of the fight. The airlock hissed open, revealing the dimly lit industrial corridors of the Vyloran vessel. The scent of burning metal and ozone filled the air as Vexar's team stormed the ship. Almost immediately, they were met with heavy resistance, blinding flashes of enemy fire streaking toward them. "Take cover," Vexar barked, diving behind a bulkhead and returning fire. His pulse raced as he took down 2 Vyloran soldiers in rapid succession, their bodies crumpling to the ground. Green blood stained the metallic floor beneath them. The cold efficiency of battle was something Vexar had mastered long ago, but the cost never left him. Each life taken weighed heavily, and yet there was no time to linger on regret. They pushed deeper into the enemy ship, the corridors narrowing, the resistance growing fiercer with every step. Vexar's instincts screamed that something was wrong. The Vylorans were fighting harder than usual, as though they were protecting something. Or someone. "Commander, movement ahead!" shouted Sergeant Arden, his voice crackling over the comms. Before Vexar could respond, a blur of silver and black darted into view, a figure moving faster than the eye could track. He barely had time to react as twin blades slashed through the air, cutting down 2 of his men with brutal efficiency. His breath caught in his throat. She was a Valoran, but not just any soldier. Her iridescent silver skin shimmered in the dim light as she moved like liquid lightning, her black hair whipping behind her. She was all deadly grace and lethal precision, and her eyes, dark, depthless pools, locked onto his, sending a jolt through him. This was no ordinary fighter. Vexar recognized her instantly. Lyra Nox, the infamous assassin of the Valoran Empire, the one said to eliminate high-value targets with surgical precision. She wasn't just here to defend the ship, she was here for him. "Fall back," Vexar ordered, a surge of adrenaline pounding in his veins. "She's leading us into a trap." His team retreated down the narrow corridor as Lyra disappeared into the shadows as quickly as she had appeared. His mind raced. He needed a new plan. The Vylorans wouldn't go down easily, and now they had a living weapon in the form of Lyra Nox hunting them down. Just as they regrouped near the airlock, a sudden tremor rocked the ship violently. Vexar stumbled but quickly regained his balance. "Sir!" Corvin's voice crackled over the comms. "We're detecting a massive power surge in the enemy ship's core. I think there." Before Corvin could finish, a deafening explosion shook the entire vessel. The Vylorans were scuttling their own ship, intending to take the Perseverance with them. "Everyone back to the Perseverance!" Vexar shouted, urgency sharpening his voice. They sprinted down the corridors as the ship around them began to tear itself apart. He stayed at the rear, ensuring every member of his team made it safely across. Just as he was about to cross the threshold back to the Perseverance, a flash of motion caught his eye. Lyra Nox was charging toward him, her face set in a mask of grim determination. Her blades gleamed with deadly intent. Time slowed. Vexar reached for his plasma blade, knowing he wouldn't be fast enough. This was the moment he had dreaded, the end of the infamous Commander Lyle Vexar. But at the last possible second, Lyra's foot caught on a piece of debris, causing her to stumble. Her attack went wide. Vexar seized the opportunity, tackling her to the ground. They grappled fiercely, each fighting for dominance. She was quick, lightning quick, but he had the strength advantage. With a grunt, he managed to flip her onto her stomach, pinning her arms behind her back. "You're coming with me," Vexar growled in her ear. Lyra hissed in frustration, but she didn't resist as he dragged her to her feet and pushed her toward the airlock. The moment the hatch slammed shut behind them, the enemy ship exploded into a brilliant fireball, the shockwave rattling the Perseverance. Breathing hard, Vexar turned to face his prisoner. Lyra stood between two armed guards, her dark eyes never leaving his. There was hatred there, but something else as well. A flicker of curiosity, of calculation. Vexar knew this was just the beginning. She was dangerous, perhaps the most dangerous opponent he had ever faced. But for now, she was his prisoner, and he intended to find out everything she knew. The hum of the energy field filled the small, dimly lit brig, casting a faint glow around Lyra Nox's form. She sat calmly on the narrow cot, her legs crossed, silver iridescent skin shimmering under the light, as though she hadn't just survived a ship's destruction and narrowly escaped death. Her dark eyes, sharp and unblinking, remained fixed on the figure standing just outside the containment field. Commander Lyle Vexar. He was motionless, hands clasped behind his back, his face a mask of icy control. But inside, his mind raced. He had heard stories of Lyra Nox, the Valoran assassin whispered about in war rooms and command meetings, but standing face to face with her, he realized those stories had barely scratched the surface. She was lethal, unflinching, and now his prisoner. He had no illusions about the danger she posed. He had won a brief battle, but the war with this woman was far from over. "So, Commander Vexar," Lyra purred, breaking the silence. Her voice was low, almost musical, but it carried a sharp edge. "To what do I owe the pleasure of your personal visit?" She leaned forward slightly, her dark hair falling around her face, as though to study him more closely. "I expected someone taller." Vexar's lips tightened. He had expected contempt, even defiance, but the subtle mocking in her tone caught him off guard. His eyes narrowed, meeting hers with unyielding resolve. "I expected the infamous assassin of the Valoran Empire to be quicker on her feet." For a fleeting second, a spark of irritation flashed in Lyra's eyes, quickly masked by her cold, predatory gaze. "It won't happen again," she said, her voice like steel. "See that it doesn't," Vexar replied, his tone flat as he pulled up a chair, sitting just outside the shimmering energy field. "I have some questions for you, Nox, and I expect answers." Lyra tilted her head slightly, amusement flickering across her face. "Is this the part where you try to break me with endless interrogation? Or perhaps you'll attempt to appeal to my better nature?" She leaned back, feigning nonchalance, but her eyes gleamed with sharp intelligence. "I hate to disappoint you, Commander, but I'm not in the mood for games." "Neither am I," Vexar shot back, his voice hardening. He refused to be drawn into her banter. "Let's start with why you were on that ship. It wasn't a military vessel, so what was your mission?" Lyra's lips curled into a slow, dangerous smile. "Mission? Commander, I was simply sightseeing. It's amazing how lovely space can be from the wrong side of a warship's viewport." She leaned forward, her tone softening to a mock whisper. "You should try it sometime." Vexar's patience was wearing thin. "Cut the games, Nox," he snapped, his voice a low growl. "You're a highly trained assassin, not some tourist. What were you really doing on that ship?" For a moment, Lyra's smile faltered. Something flickered in her eyes. Something deep, fleeting, but unmistakably human. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced once more by her steely composure. "My mission," she said, her voice quiet now, "was you." The silence that followed was deafening. Vexar's pulse quickened, though his face remained stoic. "Me?" he echoed, his voice controlled despite the sudden chill running down his spine. "Yes," Lyra murmured, her gaze never wavering. "You, Commander Lyle Vexar, the Federation's ruthless hero, responsible for countless Vyloran deaths. Did you really think they'd let you continue breathing forever? Her words cut through him like a blade, but Vexar forced himself to remain composed. He had heard accusations like this before. He had given orders that led to the deaths of enemies, soldiers, civilians. It didn't matter in war. His title, Ruthless, had become a badge, one he bore with heavy guilt. "I gave your people every chance to surrender," Vexar growled, his voice hardening as he stood from the chair. "I'm no butcher, Nox." Lyra's calm facade cracked, her eyes narrowing into slits of cold fury. "Keep telling yourself that," she spat. "Maybe it helps you sleep at night, knowing the blood of thousands is on your hands." Vexar took a step back, the rage rising in his chest like a storm. But then he saw it, the tiniest flicker of fear in Lyra's eyes, the barely perceptible tremor in her voice. She was goading him, trying to provoke a reaction, and he had nearly fallen for it. With an iron will, he forced the anger down. "Nice try," he said quietly, his voice like ice. "But I've made my peace with who I am. The question is, have you?" Lyra's gaze faltered, and for the first time, Vexar saw uncertainty. It was brief, but it was there, a crack in her armor. He pressed on, his voice low but insistent. "What's your endgame, Nox? What do you hope to gain by coming after me?" There was a long pause. Lyra's eyes searched his face as though she was weighing something deep within herself. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "To end this war," she said, "by any means necessary." The raw honesty in her words struck Vexar like a physical blow. He leaned forward, his heart pounding, torn between disbelief and a strange, reluctant understanding. "And how do you plan to do that?" he asked, his voice softer now. Lyra's gaze never wavered. "With you," she whispered, "or against you, the choice is yours." The weight of her words hung in the air between them, heavy with consequence and meaning. Vexar stared at her, his mind racing. This was no simple assassin, no mindless killer. There was something deeper at play, and he had just been pulled into a game far more dangerous than he had realized. As he turned to leave the brig, Vexar's mind was a storm of conflicting thoughts. Whatever game Lyra Nox was playing, she was right about one thing. This war was far from over. And for the first time, he wasn't sure if he would be the one to end it. Behind him, Lyra's voice followed him like a shadow. "Sweet dreams, Commander," she said, her tone mocking and dangerous. "I'll see you in them." Commander Lyle Vexar stood before the glowing containment field, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. His eyes bore into Lyra Nox, who sat on the edge of her cot, her silver skin shimmering in the faint light. She looked at him with an expression that was impossible to decipher, equal parts defiance and intrigue. 2 days had passed since her capture, and still Vexar had little to show for it. Despite hours of questioning, she had revealed almost nothing. Each conversation was a dangerous game of manipulation, and Vexar was starting to realize how skilled Lyra was at playing it. Every answer she gave was laced with riddles, calculated half-truths, and the kind of clever deflections that made it nearly impossible to know what was real and what was not. It gnawed at him. "I don't understand you, Nox," Vexar said, breaking the heavy silence. His voice was calm but carried the weight of frustration. "You claim you want to end this war, yet you hide behind your games. What do you gain from keeping secrets?" Lyra's dark eyes met his, unblinking. For a moment, the room felt smaller, the tension between them a living thing that neither could shake. "You assume my secrets are just that, mine," she said softly, her voice smooth like a knife sliding between ribs. "But sometimes, Commander, secrets belong to those who can't afford to lose them. You think I hold the cards here, but you're wrong." Vexar's jaw tightened. She was doing it again, twisting her words to dance around the truth. He stepped forward, stopping just shy of the containment field. "Who are you protecting?" he demanded. "What are you really hiding?" A ghost of a smile flickered across her lips, and for the first time since her capture, Vexar thought he saw something genuine behind her mask. Not anger or defiance, but something far more vulnerable. Fear? Regret? He couldn't tell. "You think I'm protecting someone?" Lyra asked, her voice softer now, almost wistful. "Commander, I'm protecting everything. Do you understand that? Every word I say has a price. Every secret I keep means someone else doesn't die. You want to know the truth? The truth is death, Vexar. For me, for you, for them." Vexar's heart stilled, his breath catching in his throat. He hadn't expected this. Lyra's tone had shifted, dropping the venom and sarcasm that usually laced their conversations. There was something raw in her now, something fragile. "You came here to kill me," Vexar said, voice low and measured. "But you didn't. Why?" For a moment, Lyra said nothing. Her fingers traced an invisible line along the edge of the cot, her eyes distant, as though she were seeing something far beyond the cold metal walls of the brig. "Because," she whispered, "killing you would have solved nothing. It wouldn't have stopped what's coming." Vexar's pulse quickened. "What's coming?" Lyra's eyes locked onto his, and he felt the weight of her stare in the pit of his stomach. "The end of this war," she said. "But not in the way you think. This war doesn't end with victory. It ends with blood. Oceans of it, and I won't be the one to drown in it." Vexar's mind raced. He had been prepared for 1,000 possibilities, but not this. Lyra's words carried a gravity that unsettled him in a way he hadn't felt in years. She wasn't bluffing. That much was clear. Whatever secrets she held, they weren't just about him. They were about something far larger, something that could tear apart both the Federation and the Veloran Empire. "You're talking in circles again," Vexar pressed, his voice low and urgent. "You want this war to end, then help me end it. Tell me what's coming." Lyra stood, slowly, gracefully, and for the first time since her capture, she stepped toward him. The energy field separating them hummed softly, casting a faint glow between their bodies. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of challenge and something he couldn't name. "You think you can handle the truth, Commander?" she whispered. "I've seen what your side is willing to do. You've seen what mine is capable of. But what you haven't seen is what happens when both sides realize the war is no longer theirs to control. You want my secrets? Fine, but once you have them, you'll wish you hadn't." Vexar's breath caught as he stared into her eyes, feeling the gravity of her words press against his chest. For a moment, he wasn't sure if he wanted to know what she had seen, what she knew. But there was no turning back now. "Tell me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra's lips curled into a faint, bitter smile. "Not here. Not like this." Vexar frowned. "Then how?" She stepped back, her face retreating into the shadow of the brig. "You'll see," she murmured. "But be careful, Commander. Secrets have a price, and I'm not sure you're ready to pay it." Vexar watched her in silence, the weight of her words settling deep within him. Whatever game they were playing had just become far more dangerous, and for the first time, Vexar wasn't sure he would survive it. The air on the Perseverance had grown thick with tension, like the charged calm before a storm. Commander Lyle Vexar could feel it, heavy in the corridors and silent in the mess halls. Eyes followed him wherever he went, some filled with doubt, others with simmering resentment. His crew, once united in purpose, was fracturing. And at the center of it all was Lyra Nox, the Veloran assassin who haunted every shadow on the ship. Vexar stood at the observation window of his quarters, gazing out at the cold expanse of space. His reflection stared back at him, but he could barely recognize himself anymore. The weight of command had always been heavy, but now it felt unbearable. He had trusted his crew with his life, and now that trust was slipping away like sand through his fingers. The chime at his door startled him from his thoughts. "Enter," he called, turning to face whoever stood beyond. The door slid open to reveal Commander Arden Chen, his second in command. Normally calm and composed, Chen's expression was dark, his brow furrowed in deep concern. "Commander," Vexar greeted, now his voice steady but edged with weariness. "What is it?" Chen stepped forward, his voice low. "We need to talk about the crew." Vexar tensed, already knowing where this was going. "What about them?" Chen's gaze flickered to the closed door before meeting Vexar's eyes again. "There's unrest. They're questioning your judgment. Having Lyra Nox on board has everyone on edge. I've heard whispers. Mutiny." The word dropped like a stone between them. Vexar felt a surge of anger rise in his chest. "Mutiny? They're questioning my judgment because I'm keeping the most dangerous Veloran assassin under lock and key? She could be the key to ending this war." "I know, sir," Chen said quietly. "But they don't see it that way. They see an enemy on board, someone who's killed Federation officers before, and they don't trust her. Or you." Vexar clenched his fists, pacing across the room. "Do they really think I've lost my mind? That I've forgotten who we're fighting?" Chen hesitated before speaking. "It's not that simple. You've always been ruthless, Commander. They followed you because they believed in your strength, your conviction. But Lyra, she's different. She represents something they don't understand, and when people don't understand something, they fear it." Vexar stopped pacing, staring hard at his second-in-command. "So what are you saying, Chen? Do they fear me now too?" Chen met his gaze, his expression unreadable. "They're afraid of what you're becoming. You've been spending more and more time with her, asking them to trust that she's not the enemy. But the truth is, they're starting to wonder if she's influencing you." A bitter laugh escaped Vexar's throat. "Influencing me? I'm trying to extract vital information from her. This is war, not some twisted alliance." "Maybe," Chen said, his voice carefully measured. "But you're walking a thin line. If you don't address this soon, we'll be dealing with more than just whispers. We'll be dealing with an outright rebellion." Vexar's heart raced, but he forced himself to remain calm. His grip tightened on the edge of the desk, his mind swirling with the weight of Chen's words. He had known there would be resistance to keeping Lyra on board, but mutiny? He hadn't expected his crew to turn on him. "Call a general assembly," Vexar said, his voice cold and resolute. "I'll address the crew directly." Chen gave a sharp nod before leaving the room, but the unease lingered. Vexar turned back to the viewport, staring into the void. His reflection stared back, his features etched with the exhaustion of a man carrying too many burdens. Hours later, Vexar stood before the assembled crew in the mess hall. Hundreds of faces stared back at him, a mix of anxiety, doubt, and simmering tension. The room felt suffocating. He could hear the murmurs, feel the pulse of their unrest. It was like standing at the heart of a brewing storm. He took a deep breath, his voice carrying over the crowd. "I know you're all concerned about our guest. I understand your fear. Lyra Nox is a dangerous enemy, but she is also our key to ending this war. I brought her aboard because she has information, valuable intelligence that can stop the bloodshed. I've always asked for your trust, and now I'm asking for it again." A murmur rippled through the crowd, but it wasn't one of approval. A voice rose from the back, cutting through the tension like a blade. "How can we trust her, Commander? She's a murderer. She's the enemy." Vexar's eyes found the speaker, Ensign Reeves, young and brimming with anger. "I understand your concern, Ensign," Vexar said, his voice firm. "But I give you my word. Lyra Nox is under guard at all times. She poses no threat to this crew. We've faced far worse dangers together, and this is no different." Reeves' eyes blazed with defiance. "No different. She's killed our people. How many more of us need to die before you realize she can't be trusted?" The crowd stirred, voices rising in agreement. Vexar's heart pounded, but he refused to back down. "Enough," he said sharply, silencing the room. "I understand your fears, but this is bigger than any one of us. We're on the brink of something bigger than a battle. This could end the war. Trust me, as you always have." But the crowd remained restless, their doubts gnawing at the edges of his authority. And then, the doors hissed open. All eyes turned as Lyra Nox herself strode into the mess hall, flanked by 2 guards. The room fell into stunned silence. Vexar's hand instinctively went to his sidearm, but Lyra didn't make any aggressive moves. She simply stood there, her dark eyes sweeping over the crew. "You fear me," she said, her voice calm but carrying the weight of truth. "I don't blame you. I am the enemy. I've killed your people, and you've killed mine. But ask yourselves this: how many more must die before we realize this war benefits no one but those in power?" The room remained tense, but Vexar could feel the shift. Doubt lingered, but for the first time, the seed of something else was planted. Possibility. As Lyra's words hung in the air, Vexar knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, the storm was only beginning. The Perseverance rocked violently, the shrill wail of the red alert alarms echoing through its metallic halls. Commander Vexar steadied himself against the wall as the ship trembled under enemy fire, his jaw clenched and heart racing. He sprinted toward the bridge, his mind a tangled storm of decisions and doubts. They'd been under attack for barely minutes, and already the Perseverance was struggling to hold together. "Commander!" Chen's voice crackled over the intercom, sharp and urgent. "The Vyloran fleet has engaged. Shields are holding, but we've sustained damage to the lower decks. Hull breach imminent if we don't." Another explosion rocked the ship, nearly throwing Vexar off his feet. His pulse quickened as he tore down the corridor, weaving past crew members scrambling to their posts. The ship was in chaos, but there was something more. Something deeper. It wasn't just the Valorans attacking. There was betrayal in the air. He could feel it. Bursting onto the bridge, Vexar found his crew in a flurry of action, alarms blaring, lights flickering. Commander Chen was at the helm, his face pale but composed, barking orders to the crew. "Status report," Vexar demanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. Chen turned to him, his expression grim. "We're under heavy fire from the Vyloran fleet, Commander. Shields are at 45%, and we're sustaining structural damage. But there's something else." Vexar's heart skipped a beat. "What?" "Internal weapons fire," Chen said, his voice tight with tension. "It's coming from inside the ship." The blood drained from Vexar's face. He'd expected a mutiny, but not now. Not when they were already under attack. His mind raced, piecing together the puzzle. This was no coincidence. The timing was too perfect. The traitors had chosen their moment well. "Where?" Vexar asked, his voice low and dangerous. Chen glanced at the monitor, tapping furiously at the controls. "Engineering. Security's already en route, but the situation is escalating. If they take the engine core, we're done." Vexar's hands clenched into fists. "Chen, you have the bridge. Hold the line. I'll deal with the mutineers myself." Without waiting for a response, Vexar turned and bolted from the bridge, his heart pounding in his chest. As he raced through the corridors, the ship continued to shudder under the barrage of Vyloran fire. He could hear the distant sounds of combat, blaster shots, the clash of fists, screams cut short. His crew was fighting each other, tearing apart everything they had fought so hard to protect. And it was his fault. He'd let this happen. He'd let doubt fester. He rounded a corner, nearly colliding with a group of armed crewmen. Their faces were hardened with grim determination, eyes flashing with betrayal. At their head stood Ensign Reeves, his blaster raised and aimed directly at Vexar's chest. "Stand down," Vexar shouted, his voice thundering through the narrow corridor. Reeves's eyes narrowed, his grip tightening on the blaster. "Not anymore, Commander. You've led us to ruin. Keeping that Vyloran assassin aboard, it's a death sentence for all of us. We're taking back the ship." Vexar's blood boiled. "You think mutiny is the answer? We're under attack, and instead of fighting for survival, you're fighting your own crew?" Reeves's face twisted in rage. "We're fighting to survive. You've lost your mind, Commander. You've put her," he spat the word, "before us. Before the Federation. She's an assassin, and she's gotten inside your head." "Reeves, listen to me," Vexar said, trying to keep his voice steady, though fury bubbled beneath the surface. "Lyra Nox is the key to stopping this war. You don't understand what's at stake." "We understand more than you think," Reeves hissed, "and we're not going to let you destroy everything we've fought for." The tension snapped like a wire. Reeves fired. Vexar dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the blaster shot as it sizzled past him, scorching the wall behind. Without hesitation, he drew his sidearm and returned fire, stunning two of the mutineers. Reeves snarled, charging forward with a fury that could only come from betrayal. They grappled, bodies colliding with brutal force. "You're a fool," Reeves growled through clenched teeth. "She's using you." Vexar shoved him back, his strength fueled by rage. "And you're blind. You think mutiny will save you? You're dooming us all." Before Reeves could respond, the ship shuddered violently, throwing them both to the ground. Alarms blared louder, and the lights flickered, plunging the corridor into momentary darkness. They didn't have time for this. The ship was falling apart. Vexar scrambled to his feet, his pulse pounding in his ears. Reeves lay unconscious beside him, but the battle was far from over. His crew was divided, his ship was on the brink of destruction, and the enemy fleet was closing in. He had to get to engineering. He had to stop the mutiny before it tore the Perseverance apart. As he raced down the corridor, one thought echoed through his mind, louder than the alarms, louder than the gunfire. Betrayal was the deadliest enemy of all. And it had just struck at the heart of his command. The corridor leading to engineering was a war zone. Smoke choked the air, and the acrid stench of burnt circuitry clung to Vexar's senses as he pushed forward. The sharp crackle of gunfire echoed through the metal walls, punctuated by the occasional scream. His body ached from the earlier struggle with Reeves, but there was no time to stop. The ship was dying around him. And if he didn't act soon, everything, the crew, the mission, Lyra, would be lost. Vexar rounded the corner and was immediately met with the sight of chaos. Security teams exchanged fire with a group of mutineers entrenched near the entrance to engineering. Sparks flew from damaged panels, and the dull red glow of emergency lights painted everything in a hellish hue. Behind the mutineers, Vexar could see the reinforced doors to the engine room, a door that could seal the ship's fate if they managed to breach it. He didn't hesitate. Vexar fired, stunning two mutineers before they could react, their bodies crumpling to the floor. The rest of the traitors scattered for cover, returning fire with a fury born of desperation. "Commander!" A familiar voice called out from behind the barricade. Sergeant Arden, one of Vexar's most trusted soldiers, waved him over. "We're pinned down. They're trying to take control of the core." Vexar ducked behind the barricade, his heart pounding in his chest. He had expected the mutiny, but the level of coordination and timing unnerved him. They were too organized, too precise, for this to be spontaneous dissent. Something, or someone, had pushed them over the edge. "How bad is it?" Vexar asked, firing a few shots over the barricade. Arden's face was grim. "Bad, sir. They've rigged explosives near the core access. If they detonate, it'll take the whole ship down. Then we have to stop them." Vexar's voice was hard, but a cold knot of dread coiled in his gut. Even if they could regain control of engineering, the Vyloran fleet was still bearing down on them. The timing was too perfect. This wasn't just a mutiny, it was sabotage. A sudden surge of plasma fire forced them both lower behind the barricade. Vexar gritted his teeth. There was no way around it. They had to end this quickly. Then, through the smoke and chaos, a figure appeared. Lyra Nox. She moved like a shadow, her form cutting through the thick haze of battle. calm and deliberate. Vexar's breath caught in his throat. 2 guards flanked her, their expressions tense but unwavering. It wasn't fear that held them in check, it was something else, something dangerous. Lyra's eyes found Vexar's, and in that moment the battle seemed to fall away. Her face was a mask of calm, but beneath it Vexar could see the steely resolve of someone who had lived in the shadows of betrayal her entire life. "What the hell is she doing here?" Arden hissed, his blaster raised. Vexar held up a hand. "Stand down, Sergeant." "But sir." "Stand down," Vexar snapped, his gaze never leaving Lyra's. She stepped forward, ignoring the weapons still trained on her. Her silver skin seemed to glow in the low light, and her black eyes were unreadable, deep pools of mystery and danger. When she finally spoke, her voice was a low murmur, barely audible over the cacophony of battle. "I told you, Commander," she said, her tone eerily calm. "The war is bigger than either of us. You've been fighting the wrong enemy." Vexar's grip tightened on his blaster, but he didn't move. He had come to expect Lyra's cryptic statements, her mind games. But something in her voice this time felt different, more urgent. He had no choice but to listen. "Then tell me," he growled, "who's pulling the strings?" Lyra's eyes flickered with something. Was it pain? Regret? For the briefest moment, her composure faltered, and Vexar saw the weight of years of secrets and lies etched into the lines of her face. "Both sides," she said softly. "The Federation. The Valoran Empire. They've been playing us all, Commander. The war is a lie, engineered to keep power in the hands of those who profit from it." Vexar stared at her, his pulse pounding in his ears. "That's impossible. The Federation would never." "Would never what?" Lyra interrupted, her voice sharp. "Sacrifice soldiers for political gain? Trade lives for influence? You've been on the front lines, Vexar. You've seen the cost of this war. Do you really think it's about victory anymore?" Vexar felt a chill run through him. The pieces were starting to fall into place, and the picture they formed was one he couldn't bear to accept. He had spent years fighting for the Federation, for what he believed was right. But now, "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice quieter now, almost desperate. Lyra stepped closer, her gaze intense. "I'm saying that the war was never meant to end. Not for us. Not for the soldiers, the people in power, the ones who sit safe in their fortresses, who count credits and make deals. They keep it going. They need it, and we're the pawns in their game." Vexar's mind reeled. It couldn't be true. But as he looked into Lyra's eyes, he realized that deep down, he had always suspected. The endless battles, the senseless loss of life, the orders that never seemed to lead to peace, only more destruction. The war wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a machine fed by the blood of soldiers. "And the mutiny?" Vexar asked, his voice hoarse. "Was that part of the plan too?" Lyra's expression darkened. "They want the Perseverance destroyed. The Federation's been compromised. There are people on your side who want this ship gone, along with everyone on board, to make room for something else, something worse." A cold fury settled over Vexar. He had been lied to, used, and now his ship, his crew, was about to pay the price. "Then we end this," he said, his voice hardening. "Right now." Lyra nodded, her gaze fierce. Together, with a renewed sense of purpose, Vexar turned toward the mutineers still barricaded near engineering. His mind was clear now, the fog of doubt burned away by the fires of betrayal. There would be no more secrets, no more games. It was time to take back control of his ship, and the war. The ship's lights flickered, casting a pallid glow over the debris-strewn corridors of the Perseverance. Vexar led the way, his hand tightly gripping his plasma blaster, every muscle coiled and ready. Lyra walked beside him, her movements smooth, calculated, as if she were slipping through the shadows, even with eyes trained on her. The uneasy truce between them was palpable, a tension as sharp as the weapons they both wielded. The battle for engineering had left scars, both on the ship and in Vexar's mind. He had seen loyalists and mutineers fall, their bodies crumpled on the cold metal floors. Men and women he had trusted, faces he had known for years, turned against him, consumed by fear, lies, and desperation. And now, the Vyloran assassin walked beside him, an enemy who was becoming something far more complicated. "Are you sure we can trust them?" Lyra's voice cut through the stillness, soft but laced with steel. Her dark eyes flicked toward him, questioning. "Your crew, I mean." Vexar didn't answer immediately. His thoughts were a storm. Could he trust his crew? The mutiny had fractured everything, shattered the bond that had once been ironclad. But there were still those who believed in him. Those who had fought alongside him, even when doubt gnawed at the edges of their faith. "I trust those who've earned it," he replied, his voice low, his gaze fixed forward. "And right now, we don't have the luxury of doubting each other." Lyra gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. She understood the stakes better than anyone. The silence between them stretched thin, filled with the unspoken weight of what they both knew. This alliance was as fragile as the ship they stood on. One misstep, one moment of hesitation, and it would all come crashing down. They reached the door to the central command room, and Vexar hesitated for a fraction of a second, his hand hovering over the controls. Inside were the few remaining officers loyal to him, those who had survived the mutiny and still clung to the hope of making it through the battle outside. He knew that bringing Lyra here was a risk. His crew barely tolerated her presence on the ship, and now she was standing with him, by his side, as though she were one of them. "Let me handle this," he muttered, glancing at her. "They're not ready to see you as an ally. Not yet." Her lips curved into a wry smile, but there was no warmth in it. "I'm used to being hated, Commander. It doesn't change what has to be done." Vexar pressed the control panel, and the door slid open with a hiss. Inside, the command room buzzed with subdued activity. Lieutenant Corvin looked up from his station, his face pale and lined with exhaustion. The others turned, their gazes hardening when they saw Lyra. "What is she doing here?" Corvin demanded, stepping forward, his hand instinctively resting on his sidearm. "She's here because we need her," Vexar replied, his voice carrying the weight of command. "Lyra has critical information that could turn this fight in our favor." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the room. Vexar could see the doubt, the anger simmering just below the surface. He could see it in their faces, the fear that he had been compromised, that the ruthless commander they had followed for years had been twisted by the enemy. "She's the enemy," Corvin spat, his voice sharp. "She killed our people, Vexar. We can't trust her." "I know what she's done," Vexar replied, his voice hard, his gaze locking onto Corvin's. "But I also know that if we don't work together, this ship won't survive the next attack. The Federation won't survive." Corvin hesitated, his hand tightening on his weapon. "And you're willing to stake everything on her word?" Vexar straightened, his resolve unshakable. "I'm willing to stake everything on ending this war. Lyra has information that could expose the conspiracy fueling this entire conflict. If we don't act now, all of this, all the lives we've lost, will have been for nothing." The room fell into a tense silence. The weight of Vexar's words pressed down on them all, as heavy as the ship's failing hull. No one spoke, but the doubt was thick in the air, threatening to choke them. Then, slowly, Corvin lowered his hand from his weapon. His face remained tight with distrust, but he stepped back. "If you believe this is the way, sir," he said quietly, "we'll follow you. But I don't trust her, and I don't think anyone else here does either." Lyra's eyes flickered with something, an acknowledgement of the truth she had long accepted. She was a weapon, a tool of fear, and trust was something she had never expected to earn. But in this moment, it wasn't about trust, it was about survival. Vexar nodded, turning to face the room. "None of us have to trust her. We just need to trust that together we have a chance to end this war. It's a fragile alliance, but it's the only one we've got." Lyra stepped forward then, her voice steady and calm. "The Vyloran fleet isn't your only enemy. The real threat lies deeper, in both our ranks. The war has been a lie, manipulated by those who profit from it. And if we don't expose them now, the Federation and the Empire will tear each other apart for nothing." The crew listened in uneasy silence, their expressions still clouded with doubt, but something had shifted. The truth was seeping in, breaking through the walls they had built around their loyalties. They didn't trust Lyra, but they didn't have to. They only had to believe that there was something worth saving. As Vexar stood beside her, the weight of the fragile alliance between them pressing on his shoulders, he knew one thing for certain. The road ahead was treacherous, but for the first time he could see a way forward. Together. The air on the Perseverance felt different now, thicker, heavier, filled with a tension that had nothing to do with war. As Commander Vexar stood on the bridge, staring out into the endless stretch of space, he could feel the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on him. The scars of the recent mutiny still lingered, damaged walls, systems struggling to stay operational, and the faces of those who had fallen. His ship had been fractured, its heart broken, but somehow they had survived. Barely. "Commander," Lyra's voice cut through the silence, soft yet sharp as always. She had entered the bridge quietly, her presence a constant shadow beside him now. "The Vyloran and Federation fleets are holding position. They're waiting for you." Vexar's gaze didn't waver from the viewport. Two fleets, once deadly enemies, now hovered on the precipice of something far more uncertain: peace. A fragile, tentative peace that could shatter with a single word, a single action. It was up to him now, and the weight of that responsibility felt like a mountain on his chest. "Have they agreed to the terms?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Lyra stepped closer, her eyes narrowing slightly. They're willing to talk. For now, that's all we can ask for. Her voice softened, and Vexor thought he detected a hint of exhaustion in her words. This could work, you know. It won't be easy, but it's possible. If we play it right. He finally turned to face her. The light from the stars glinted off her silver skin, casting her in an almost ethereal glow. She had been his enemy, the face of everything he had fought against, and now she was the only person he trusted in this delicate moment. The irony wasn't lost on him. Do you believe that? Vexar asked, his voice quiet but firm. Do you really think we can end this? Lyra's gaze flickered, the hard edges of her assassin's mask softening for a brief moment. I've spent my entire life in the shadows of this war, Vexar. I was trained to believe that victory meant survival, nothing else. But now I see that survival is more than winning. It's about building something better, something that lasts. Vexar's heart thudded heavily in his chest. He had fought for survival too, but his survival had come at a different cost, one that had left him with blood on his hands and a soul weighed down by guilt. He wasn't sure he believed in peace, not anymore. But standing here, on the cusp of something he had never dared dream possible, he realized he had to try. For the crew. For the future. For himself. Open the channel, he ordered, his voice steady, though the storm inside him raged. The bridge hummed with tension as Lieutenant Corvin activated the communication system. The view screen flickered to life, and Vexar found himself staring into the faces of two men he had never thought he'd speak to in this way. The Federation Admiral and the Vyloran High Commander. Their faces were grim, weathered by the endless years of conflict, and their eyes held the same weariness Vexar had come to know all too well. Admiral, High Commander, Vexar greeted them, his voice formal but devoid of the cold sharpness it once held. We're here to end this war, for good. The Federation Admiral's eyes narrowed slightly, his lips pressed into a thin line. End it how, Commander? This war wasn't started by words, and it won't be ended by them either. That's where you're wrong, Lyra interjected, stepping into view beside Vexar. Her presence on the screen seemed to send a ripple of shock through both leaders. This war was started by the very people who stand to gain the most from it, and it's time for all of us to stop playing their game. The Valoran High Commander shifted, his gaze cold but curious. You speak boldly, assassin, but bold words don't change the fact that blood has been spilled, on both sides. Vexar nodded, his heart heavy. We've all lost people. Good people. But if we continue down this path, more will die. Countless more. Lyra's right. This war has been a manipulation, designed to keep us fighting while others profit from the chaos. We've uncovered evidence, communications that prove it. You've seen it yourselves. There was a beat of silence, the weight of the truth settling over them like a heavy cloak. The Admiral's face remained stony, but his voice was softer now. And what do you propose, Vexar? After everything that's happened, how do we trust the word of a Vyloran assassin? How do we trust you? Vexar drew in a deep breath, his eyes locking onto the Admiral's. You don't have to trust us. You only need to trust that this war will destroy everything, both our worlds, our futures. If we don't stop now, there won't be anything left to fight for. The silence that followed was deafening. Vexar could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the decision hanging in the balance. His heart pounded, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, and for a brief, agonizing second, he thought they might reject him. But then, the Valoran High Commander spoke. Enough blood has been spilled, he said, his voice low but resolute. Perhaps it is time we consider peace. The words hit Vexar like a shockwave, reverberating through every fiber of his being. The Admiral hesitated for a moment longer, his face etched with reluctance, but finally he gave a curt nod. Then let's talk. Relief flooded through Vexar's chest, and for the first time in what felt like years, he allowed himself to breathe. The war wasn't over. Not yet. But this was the first step. The road to peace was long, treacherous, and filled with uncertainty, but they were on it now. As the screen flickered off and the negotiations began in earnest, Vexar turned to Lyra. Her expression was unreadable, but there was a light in her eyes, a glimmer of something that looked like hope. Together, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Vexar nodded, his heart swelling with a quiet, fragile belief. Together, he echoed, and for the first time it felt like enough.